In 1887, a physician named Dr. Charles Byrne walked into a hospital room in rural Pennsylvania and found himself staring up at a man who stood 8 feet, 11 inches tall. The giant's name was Captain Martin Van Buren Bates, and he was dying. What happened in that room over the next 72 hours would haunt Dr. Byrne for the rest of his life. Because just before the giant took his final breath, he whispered something to the doctor, something about the world before, something about who they really were. And according to Dr. Byrne's personal journal, discovered in 2003 inches, a Philadelphia estate sale, those words changed everything the doctor thought he knew about human history. If you're watching this, hit subscribe, because what I'm about to show you connects to a pattern of suppressed medical records, destroyed anatomical evidence, and a systematic campaign to erase an entire category of human beings from our historical timeline. This isn't speculation. These are documented cases with names, dates, and medical files that were buried for over a century. Captain Martin Van Buren Bates wasn't some carnival curiosity. He was a decorated Civil War officer, an educated man who spoke 4 languages, and according to every account from people who met him, he possessed an intellect that far exceeded the average man of his era. Born in 1837 inches, Letcher County, Kentucky, Bates came from a family of unusual height. His father stood 6 feet 8 inches, his mother 6 feet 2 inches. But Martin exceeded them both, reaching his full height of 8 feet 11 inches by the age of 19. The historical record tells us that gigantism is a pituitary disorder, a malfunction of the endocrine system that causes abnormal growth. But here's what that explanation doesn't account for. Captain Bates lived to be 50 years old. Most individuals with pituitary gigantism in the modern era don't survive past their 30s due to the strain on their cardiovascular system. Bates not only survived, he thrived. He fought in the Confederate Army, where he commanded respect from soldiers who initially saw him as a freak. He traveled the world as part of an exhibition with his wife, Anna Swan, who stood 7 feet 11 inches tall. Together, they were billed as the tallest married couple in the world. And here's where it gets interesting. Anna Swan gave birth twice. Both children were of enormous size. The first baby, a girl, was born in 1872 and weighed 18 pounds. She lived only hours. The second child, a boy born in 1879, weighed 23 pounds, 11 ounces, and measured 30 inches in length at birth. He survived for 11 hours. These aren't normal birth weights. These aren't normal proportions. And according to the medical report filed by the attending physician, Dr. Lewis Beach, the infant's bone structure was fully formed, dense, and showed none of the fragility typically associated with gigantism. Dr. Beach noted in his report that the child's skeletal development resembled that of a 6-month-old infant, not a newborn. The report was filed with the Ohio Medical Board in 1879. It was removed from public record in 1923. No explanation was given. By 1887, Captain Bates was in declining health. He had developed severe respiratory complications, likely due to the sheer size of his frame, putting strain on his lungs. He and Anna had retired from public life and settled in Seville, Ohio, where they ran a farm. In August of that year, Bates collapsed while working in his barn. Anna sent for Dr. Charles Byrne, a physician who had recently moved to the area from Philadelphia. Dr. Byrne had studied at the University of Pennsylvania and had spent time working in anatomical research before opening a private practice. He was known for his detailed record-keeping and his fascination with unusual medical cases. When Dr. Byrne arrived at the Bates farm, he found Captain Bates bedridden, struggling to breathe, and running a fever that refused to break. Over the next 3 days, Dr. Byrne administered what treatments were available at the time, but it became clear that the giant was dying. According to Dr. Byrne's journal, it was on the 3rd night, around 2 in the morning, that Captain Bates asked to speak with him privately. Anna left the room, and that's when the giant started talking. Dr. Byrne's journal entry from that night is 17 pages long. It was written in a frantic, almost stream of consciousness style, as if the doctor was trying to capture every word before he forgot. The journal describes how Captain Bates told him that his family had always known they were different. Not diseased, not afflicted, different. Bates claimed that his grandfather had told him stories passed down through generations. Stories about a time before the flood, before the reset, before the world was reorganized into what we now accept as history. According to the journal, Captain Bates told Dr. Byrne that there were once many like him, that the giants weren't anomalies or medical aberrations, but remnants of a previous civilization. A civilization that built the massive stone structures we attribute to ancient cultures who supposedly constructed them with primitive tools and copper chisels. Bates claimed that his ancestors built in stone because they could, because their size and strength made it possible to move blocks that would require hundreds of normal-sized men to shift. Dr. Byrne wrote that he initially dismissed this as the fevered ramblings of a dying man, but then Captain Bates did something that shook him. The giant reached under his pillow and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Dr. Byrne and told him to keep it, to study it, to understand what it meant. Dr. Byrne unwrapped the cloth and found a coin. Not a coin from any known mint, not made of any metal he recognized. The object was roughly 3 inches in diameter, perfectly circular, and covered in symbols that resembled no written language Dr. Byrne had ever encountered. The metal was incredibly dense, cold to the touch, and had a faint, iridescent quality that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of the light. Captain Bates told him that the coin had been in his family for over 200 years, that it was one of the few objects that survived what he called the Great Forgetting. Dr. Byrne asked him what that meant. The giant's response, written word for word in the journal, was this: "They erased us. They destroyed the buildings. They rewrote the maps. They created a new timeline and inserted themselves as the builders. And anyone who remembered the truth, anyone who carried the blood of the old world, they hunted down and eliminated. We are the last echoes of what was. And when I die, Doctor, you will see what they do to my body. You will see how they erase even the evidence of my bones." Captain Martin Van Buren Bates died at 4:15 in the morning on August 7th, 1887. Dr. Byrne recorded the time of death and began the process of preparing the death certificate. But within hours, something strange began to happen. A group of men arrived at the farm. They claimed to be representatives from the Smithsonian Institution. They presented Anna Swan with paperwork, offering to purchase Captain Bates's remains for scientific study. The offer was substantial, $3,000, an enormous sum in 1887. Anna refused. She wanted her husband buried with dignity on their property. The men left. But 2 nights later, the Bates family crypt was broken into. Captain Bates's body was gone. Anna reported the theft to local authorities, but the investigation went nowhere. No arrests were made. No body was recovered. Dr. Byrne wrote in his journal that he visited Anna 3 weeks after the theft. She was devastated, but she told him something that chilled him. She said the men who came to purchase the body weren't from the Smithsonian. She had contacted the institution directly after the theft, and they claimed to have no record of any such offer, no record of sending representatives, no knowledge of Captain Bates at all. Dr. Byrne became obsessed with the coin. He spent years trying to decipher the symbols, consulting with linguists, archaeologists, and metallurgists. Nobody could identify the metal composition. Nobody could translate the symbols. And every expert he consulted told him the same thing: the object shouldn't exist. The precision of its manufacture suggested advanced machining capabilities that didn't exist in the 1800s or even the 1700s. One metallurgist at Johns Hopkins University tested a small scraping from the coin and found it contained trace elements that don't naturally occur together in any known alloy. In 1903, Dr. Byrne wrote a letter to the American Medical Association detailing his experience with Captain Bates and requesting an investigation into the disappearance of the body. The letter was published in the AMA Journal in March of that year. Within a month, Dr. Byrne's medical license was revoked. The official reason given was gross professional misconduct and propagation of pseudoscientific theories. Dr. Byrne's practice was shut down. He spent the last 12 years of his life attempting to restore his reputation, but he was effectively blacklisted from the medical community. He died in 1915, poor and discredited. The coin disappeared. There's no record of what happened to it after Dr. Byrne's death. His estate was seized to pay debts, and his belongings were sold at auction. But in 2003, a private collector in Philadelphia purchased a box of old medical journals and personal papers at an estate sale. Inside that box was Dr. Byrne's journal. The entire account of Captain Bates's final days, the story of the coin, and 17 years of research notes documenting Dr. Byrne's attempts to uncover the truth about the giants. The collector, a man named Robert Farrell, brought the journal to a historian at the University of Pennsylvania. The historian authenticated the journal as genuine, confirmed it was written in Dr. Byrne's hand, and verified the dates matched the documented timeline of Dr. Byrne's life. But when Farrell attempted to have the journal formally archived and studied, he ran into resistance. The university declined to accept it for their collection. Multiple historical societies refused to acknowledge its significance. And when Farrell tried to publish excerpts online, his website was hit with copyright claims from an organization called the Historical Preservation Institute, which claimed ownership of all materials related to Dr. Charles Byrne. Here's the problem. The Historical Preservation Institute doesn't exist. There's no business registration, no tax records, no physical address. It's a ghost organization that appeared solely to suppress the publication of Dr. Byrne's journal. Farrell fought the copyright claim for 2 years before giving up. The journal is now in private hands, and the only reason we know about it at all is because Farrell released scanned copies to several researchers before he died in 2019. But Captain Bates wasn't the only giant to disappear. Between 1,880 and 1,920, there are documented cases of at least 14 individuals over 7.5 feet tall whose remains were either stolen, purchased under suspicious circumstances, or simply vanished after their deaths. In 1891, a woman named Ella Ewing, who stood 8 feet 4 inches tall, died in Missouri. Her body was purchased by an anonymous buyer before her family could arrange burial. In 1905, a man named John Rogan, 8 feet 9 inches tall, died in Tennessee. His skeleton was displayed briefly in a traveling exhibition, then disappeared from public record entirely. In 1918, a giant named Fedor Machnow, 7 feet 10 inches, died in Russia. His remains were acquired by the Soviet government for study and were never seen again. There's a pattern here. Every giant who lived into the late 1800s and early 1900s had their remains confiscated, purchased, or stolen shortly after death. And in almost every case, those remains vanished into private collections, government institutions, or simply disappeared with no explanation. The Smithsonian Institution has been accused multiple times of being involved in these disappearances. In 1992, a lawsuit was filed against the Smithsonian by a group of researchers demanding access to records related to the acquisition of human remains, classified as anomalous skeletal specimens. The lawsuit was dismissed on the grounds of national security. National security for old bones. Why would skeletal remains of unusually tall people require national security classification? What could possibly be sensitive about the bones of individuals who died over a century ago? Unless those bones prove something that contradicts the accepted historical narrative, unless those bones demonstrate that these individuals weren't suffering from pituitary disorders at all, unless their bone density, skeletal structure, and anatomical proportions suggest they were something else entirely. Dr. Byrne wrote in his journal that Captain Bates's bone structure was different from normal human proportions. He described the giant's rib cage as being significantly larger in proportion to his overall height, with ribs that were thicker and more robust than expected. He noted that the captain's skull was elongated in a way that didn't match typical gigantism cases, and that his teeth were unusually large and perfectly aligned, with no decay despite the lack of modern dental care. Dr. Byrne speculated that if Bates truly suffered from a pituitary disorder, his skeletal system should have shown signs of stress, fragility, and deformity. Instead, it showed strength, symmetry, and proportional development. In 1894, a physician named Dr. Wilhelm Müller published a study in the German Medical Journal analyzing the skeletal remains of 7 individuals classified as giants who had died between 1870 and 1890. Dr. Müller's findings were remarkable. He found that these individuals shared certain skeletal characteristics that were not present in modern cases of gigantism: thicker bone cortex, larger sinus cavities, extended cranial vault, and most significantly, a bone density that was 30 to 40% higher than average human bone. Müller concluded that these individuals represented a distinct morphological variant of human anatomy that could not be explained by endocrine disorders alone. His study was published once; it was never reprinted. Dr. Müller died in 1896 under circumstances described as a sudden heart failure. He was 41 years old. His research papers were acquired by the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute and were reportedly destroyed during the Allied bombing of Berlin in World War II. Convenient. The establishment narrative tells us that giants are simply humans with hormonal imbalances, that their large size is a tragic medical condition that leads to suffering and early death. But the historical record shows something different. It shows individuals who lived functional, intelligent, and often highly accomplished lives. Captain Bates was a war hero and a successful businessman. Anna Swan was educated, articulate, and respected in her community. Ella Ewing ran her own farm and managed her finances independently. These were not sick, suffering invalids. They were capable, intelligent people who happened to be extraordinarily tall. And their intelligence was notable. Captain Bates spoke English, French, German, and Spanish fluently. He studied engineering and mathematics. Letters he wrote to his family, which were preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society archives, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of philosophy, literature, and political theory. These aren't the writings of someone whose brain was compromised by disease. These are the writings of an educated, thoughtful individual who understood the world around him with clarity and depth. Anna Swan was similarly accomplished. She taught school before her size made it socially difficult to continue in that profession. She was an accomplished musician who played piano and sang in 4 languages. Newspaper accounts from her performances describe a woman of grace, intelligence, and remarkable presence. One article from the London Times in 1871 described her as possessing an intellect that far surpassed the typical woman of her station, and noted that her conversation was marked by insight and wit that would be remarkable in any person, regardless of size. These weren't sideshow freaks, they were people, educated, capable, intelligent people who happened to be born into bodies that set them apart from everyone around them. And when they died, their bodies became commodities, objects to be studied, displayed, and ultimately disappeared. And yet, when they died, their bodies became property, not of their families, not of their communities, but of institutions that wanted to study them, classify them, and ultimately erase them from the historical record. Why? What are they hiding? Let's talk about the buildings. In the late 1800s, major cities across America and Europe were filled with enormous structures that dwarfed anything being built today. Train stations with ceilings 70 feet high, courthouses with doors 20 feet tall, government buildings with staircases designed for people who would need to be 9 or 10 feet tall to use them comfortably. The official explanation is that these buildings were designed to convey grandeur and power, that the massive scale was purely aesthetic. But look at the photographs from that era. Look at the doorways. Look at the ceiling heights. Look at the furniture in some of these old buildings. There are desks in 19th century courthouses that are 5 feet tall. There are chairs with seats positioned 3.5 feet off the ground. There are windows in old administrative buildings that start 8 feet above the floor. Who were these designed for? The standard explanation is that they were decorative, non-functional elements meant to impress visitors. But that doesn't explain why they're consistently sized for individuals between 8 and 12 feet tall. In 1885, the old Philadelphia City Hall was under construction. The building featured doors that were 18 feet tall and hallways with ceilings that reached 50 feet in some sections. Workers on the construction project reported finding foundations beneath the building site that predated the known history of the city. Foundations made of stones weighing several tons each, fitted together without mortar, in a style that matched no known architectural tradition of the colonial period. The construction foreman filed a report with the city documenting the discovery and requesting archaeological assessment before proceeding. The request was denied. The foreman was told to continue construction and to remove the old foundations completely. He complied. The stones were broken up and used as fill material. No archaeological study was ever conducted. This pattern repeats across dozens of cities. Whenever construction projects in the late 1800s uncovered old foundations, unusual masonry, or structures that didn't fit the accepted historical timeline, the response was the same: remove it, destroy it, move on. And anyone who objected or tried to preserve these findings was marginalized, discredited, or removed from their position. Captain Bates told Dr. Byrne that the giants built the old world, that the massive stone structures we see as ruins today were built by people like him. People who had the size and strength to move stones that weigh tons. People who understood engineering principles that allowed them to construct buildings that have stood for thousands of years while modern structures crumble after a few decades. And if that's true, then everything we've been taught about ancient history is a fabrication. The Smithsonian has been accused for over a century of suppressing evidence of giants. Reports from the 1800s and early 1900s describe archaeological discoveries of skeletons measuring 7 to 12 feet in length, often found in burial mounds across North America. These discoveries were reported in local newspapers, documented by surveyors, and in many cases sent to the Smithsonian for study and preservation, and then they vanished. The Smithsonian claims no records of these specimens exist, that the reports were exaggerated or misidentified, that the skeletons never arrived or were lost due to poor cataloguing practices. But here's the thing. The Smithsonian has meticulous records. They have catalogues of every artifact, every specimen, every donation received since their founding in 1846. Their archive system is one of the most comprehensive in the world. The idea that they somehow lost hundreds of giant skeletons due to clerical errors is absurd. Either the skeletons never existed, or they were deliberately destroyed. And given the number of independent newspaper reports, surveyor logs, and physician testimonies from that era, the idea that all of these reports were fabricated or mistaken is statistically impossible. The New York Times published reports of giant skeleton discoveries in 1885, 1886, 1891, 1897, and 1902. The articles provided specific measurements, locations, and names of the individuals who made the discoveries. In one case from 1897, the article described a skeleton measuring 9 feet 2 inches found in a burial mound in Ohio. The discovery was made by a team from the Ohio Historical Society. The skeleton was measured by 3 independent witnesses, photographed, and transported to the Smithsonian in a specially constructed crate. The shipping manifest still exists in the Ohio Historical Society archives. The Smithsonian's receiving log from that period shows no record of the shipment's arrival. Where did it go? A crate containing a 9-foot skeleton doesn't just disappear in transit. Someone received it. Someone signed for it. Someone catalogued it or decided not to catalogue it. And then someone made sure there would be no record of its existence. This isn't incompetence. This is intentional. In 1912, a group of miners in Wisconsin uncovered a burial mound while excavating for a new rail line. Inside the mound, they found 18 skeletons, all of them measured between 7 and 9 feet in length. The local newspaper, the Delavan Times, published a detailed report including measurements, photographs, and statements from the miners who made the discovery. The skeletons were transported to the Beloit College for study. Within 2 months, the skeletons disappeared. The college claimed they were transferred to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian claimed they never received them. No records exist of what happened to those remains. The same year, in Nevada, a team of archaeologists excavating caves near Lovelock uncovered the remains of red-haired individuals measuring over 8 feet tall. The discovery was documented, photographed, and reported in multiple newspapers, including the San Francisco Examiner. Some of the remains were sent to the University of California for analysis. Others were sent to the Smithsonian. The university's specimens were later reported as lost during a fire in 1923. The Smithsonian specimens simply vanished from their catalogue. Every time. The same result. Discovery, documentation, transfer to a major institution. Then, nothing. And when researchers try to follow up on these cases, they hit walls. Records are missing. Archives are restricted. Access is denied. The official position is that these discoveries were either hoaxes or misidentifications of normal-sized skeletons that were mismeasured or exaggerated. But the photographs exist. The newspaper reports exist. The sworn testimonies of physicians, archaeologists, and miners exist. You can't dismiss all of that as error or fraud. Dr. Byrne understood this. In his final years, he became convinced that there was a coordinated effort to erase the giants from history. Not just their physical remains, but the very memory of their existence. He wrote in 1913 that the giants represented a threat to the established historical narrative. That if people understood that there was once a race of larger, stronger, more advanced humans who built the old world infrastructure, then the entire story of human progress would have to be rewritten, and those who benefit from the current story would lose their power. What did Captain Bates mean when he said they erased us? Who is they? Doctor. Byrne speculated it was a coalition of academic institutions, government agencies, and private interests who had a vested interest in controlling the historical narrative. He believed that these groups worked together to acquire and destroy any evidence that contradicted the accepted timeline of human development. He pointed to the rapid industrialization of the late 1800s, the rise of new financial powers, and the establishment of centralized control over education and information as signs of a coordinated restructuring of society. Whether you believe Dr. Byrne's theories or not, the fact remains that something happened to the giants. They existed. We have photographs. We have medical records. We have documented accounts from credible witnesses. And then, systematically, their remains disappeared. Their records were suppressed, and anyone who tried to preserve their legacy was discredited or silenced. In 1940, a man named George Washington Ewing, who stood 7 feet 8 inches tall, died in California. His family arranged for burial in a private cemetery. The night before the funeral, the grave was dug up and the body was stolen. No arrests were made, no investigation was conducted. The family filed a police report that was closed within a week with no leads. In 1956, a giant named Robert Wadlow, 8 feet 11 inches tall, died in Michigan. Wadlow is one of the most well-documented giants in history, with thousands of photographs, medical records, and public appearances recorded. After his death, his family had him buried in a solid concrete vault to prevent grave robbing. They succeeded. Wadlow's remains were never stolen. But in 1972, a group claiming to represent a medical foundation approached the family with an offer to exhume the body for study. The family refused. The group sued. The case went to court and was ultimately dismissed. But the attempt itself raises questions. Why, 16 years after his death, was there still interest in obtaining Wadlow's remains? The giants were real. They lived among us. They were documented, photographed, and studied. And then they were systematically erased. Their bones taken, their records suppressed. Their existence reduced to myths and tall tales. Captain Martin Van Buren Bates understood this. He knew what would happen to his body after he died. He told Dr. Byrne exactly what to expect, and he was right. The coin that Captain Bates gave to Dr. Byrne represents something important. It's a physical object that connects to a history we're not allowed to know, a history where the giants weren't anomalies, but remnants of a civilization that was deliberately destroyed and forgotten. Dr. Byrne spent 17 years trying to decode that coin, and he failed. But the fact that it exists at all is proof that there's more to this story than we've been told. What happened to the giants isn't ancient history. It happened within living memory. There are people alive today whose great-grandparents met these individuals, whose families have photographs and stories passed down through generations. And yet, the official narrative tells us they were just sick people with hormonal disorders, that their size was a tragedy, not a legacy. But Captain Bates didn't see himself as diseased. He saw himself as a survivor, the last echo of what was. And his final words to Dr. Byrne were a warning. They erased us. They destroyed the buildings, they rewrote the maps, they created a new timeline and inserted themselves as the builders. And anyone who remembered the truth, anyone who carried the blood of the old world, they hunted down and eliminated. If that's true, then the question isn't just what happened to the giants. The question is, what else have they erased? What other parts of our history have been rewritten, suppressed, or destroyed? And who benefits from keeping us ignorant of our true past? Dr. Charles Byrne died, believing he had witnessed the final chapter of a forgotten civilization. He believed that Captain Martin Van Buren Bates was one of the last living links to a world that existed before the reset, before the great forgetting, before history was rewritten by those who conquered it. And whether you accept that theory or not, the evidence is undeniable. The giants existed. Their remains were taken. And someone went to extraordinary lengths to make sure we would never know the truth about who they were or what they represented. The story of Captain Bates and Dr. Byrne isn't just about one dying man and one curious physician. It's about a pattern of suppression that continues to this day. A pattern of controlling information, destroying evidence, and discrediting anyone who questions the official narrative. And until we're willing to confront that pattern, we'll never understand the full truth about our history, or about what we lost when the giants disappeared.